Thank you, everyone, for joining in. My name is Batell Balaish Sultanik, the Executive Director of the AIDS Coalition, and I'll be your MC today. Before we get started, if you need captioning, there is information in the chat for your use. Please use the Q&A for all questions, including technical support. This webinar is brought to you by the collaboration between AIDS Coalition and Hope for Israel. AIDS Coalition is a U.S. nonprofit organization, nonpartisan, whose mission is strengthening and preserving the democratic foundation of the State of Israel. Since the tragedy of October 7th, AIDS Coalition has managed a platform that supports dozens of social projects and organizations. Hope for Israel is a grassroots Zionist movement that advocates for Israel as envisioned in Israel's Declaration of Independence, against anti-Semitism, and most importantly, supports the campaign to release the hostages held by Hamas. Today, we mark 513 days that the hostages are still in captivity. We will keep fighting for them until the last one returns home. Before we dive in, as part of this gathering, AIDS Coalition would like to raise awareness to the upcoming 2025 elections for the World Zionist Congress. Online ballots and voting are opening this March 10th, and every Jew and Israeli over 18 residing in the United States, living in the US, can and must vote. AIDS Coalition slate and delegates to the Zionist Congress, including some of our speakers today, Jeremy, Jodie, and Elena, are working with various pro-democracy organizations with a single focus of reprioritizing the vast resources, $5 billion of the world Zionist institutions to rebuild Israel, to support Israeli and American communities, and ensuring that these resources are directed where they're most needed, supporting the long-term recovery and rebuilding the hardest hit areas in Israel's north and south. We hope that you will join us in this quest, championing this important mission. For more information about Hope for Israel, AIDS Coalition, and the elections, please scan the barcode, and our partners will continue onward. Today, as mentioned, joining us some of AIDS delegates for the World Zionist Congress and our partners from Israel's Tech for Israel. From the US, we have Dr. Jeremy Levin, an Israeli-American global leader in biopharmaceutical industry, bringing decades of international experience in medicine, finance, corporate governance, and policy, former CEO of TEVA and current CEO of Ovid Therapeutics. Dr. Elena Itskovich, a biotech business development consultant, entrepreneur, and community leader dedicated to fostering scientific innovation. Elena is the co-founder and president of Nest Catalyst. Jodie Gillon is the president and CEO of BioCT, the trade organization of the life science industry of the state of Connecticut. Jodie started her career in advocacy, hospitals, and government, and transitioned to industry over 3 decades ago, holding various roles across the development, patient, medical, and corporate affairs. From Israel, joining us, Dr. Ilan Samish, founder of Amai Proteins after a rich career in the academia. Dr. Samish is an activist in the high-tech forum for Israel, fighting for a better Israel in the government and in the streets. And Dr. Michal Tsur, a serial entrepreneur. She's the co-founder of co-CEO of Remepy, which is pioneering hybrid drugs. Prior, Michal was also a co-founder and president of Cultura and Sayota. Without further ado, let's get our conversation started. And Elena, I'm going to direct this first question to you. Michal, we would also like to hear your point of view as well. Be sensitive of time so we can hear everyone. Elena, Michal, what was October 7th for you? And what are the unique needs in terms of research continuity, supply chains, international partnerships? Please.
Hi, Batell. Thank you so much. So I mainly work with Israeli scientists worldwide, founders of early stage companies. And those, we could see them struggling on many fronts, from people point of view, from, people, many of their people either being hurt or recruited to the army. You could see scientists that are sort of on the fence of whether return to Israel or continue their careers abroad. You can see founders of companies struggling just to physically leave and come back to the country. So I think it's been a real challenge, and there's a lot of room for growth and opportunity to make things easier for Israeli founders.
Michal?
October 7th obviously touched all of us on a, personal as well as social and I guess national level. I mean, I have two kids in the military, one of them in a an elite combat unit, and another daughter in the military service. So obviously we were all impacted on a personal basis, with kids losing many of their friends and family members. So really a tough point in time for all Israelis. I will say that actually on the business side, that is where I felt, the strength and the resilience of the entire tech community, and specifically here the biotech community that now I'm part of. I mean, everybody stepped up despite, my partner being also called into reserve duty and many of the team members. Everybody else was, ready to fight. And, I felt that, this was actually one of the best moments of Israel with many of the Israeli entrepreneurs and tech community actually showing the greatest creativity in solutions and in supporting the civilian community. So really, for me, it was one of the most inspiring moments to see that Israel as a whole actually stepping up. I'll say not the government, but actually Israel, the community stepped up immediately, and it was, a moment of pride for me. And I felt that actually it did not really impact our business in any way. To the contrary, everybody, found additional strength. And as people came back from reserve duty, I felt it started accelerating the business. Across other companies that I'm also, involved in or investing in, I saw the same pattern.
Thank you, Michal. The next question is directed to the entire panel, so please feel free to jump in. How do you see the near future and the horizon following the dramatic period we all had? Soldiers who become leaders, Zionism, growth, new leadership, etc. Ilan, do you want to start?
Maybe yeah, thank you. I'll connect the previous question to the current one, and I do think we are in a brink of a totally new ecosystem that has a lot of beautiful things in it. We understood that what our grandparents did in creating the state of Israel with the help of the diaspora is something that we cannot just say, thank you, grandparents, and take it for granted, but now it is our turn. As a company of 50 people who was hit quite badly on October 7, we lost our director of molecular biology, Dr. Lilia Vasilkovsky-Gurevich, and on Wednesday I'm going to the funeral of Ohad Yahalomi, who just came back in a coffin and not on his two legs, with three of his immediate relatives who are my employees. There is a totally different sense of resilience, which is not only when immediately after October 7th we delivered no matter what, and when students or other were on military, everyone did any job for anyone else, weekend, night shifts, things that usually employees will not do, just to guard or fermenter, producing our sweetener or something else. What we now see is a change in civil organizations like the High Tech Forum for Israel, which is working hard in the Knesset, in the parliament, like Brothers and Sisters for Israel. And had I not been here, I would be now in a siege on Jerusalem as part of a demonstration where Brothers and Sisters of Arms is part of it. And in this work, we are doing it together, really together with Jews from around the world. And not only Jews, by the way, people who see the free world. And this is something that we never had such a huge involvement in public life in Israel. And today, this is not just looking for money and looking for what will be next. It's specific goals. If we asked for money for fire extinguishers and we had too much, some of the money went back to the people who donated it. And this is a new partnership which is well beyond Israel, with some feeling for each other, what is called arvut hadadit, or kol Yisrael arevim ze leze, meaning all of Israel are for one another, whether they're in Israel or abroad. It's really a new game.
Thank you.
Happy to chime in. I think there are so many headwinds at the moment operating from the US. I think every day, we buckle our seatbelts for a new policy change in Washington, whether it's NIH cuts or FDA. And I think, Israel has additional challenges that surround it that I think we really need to lead with the science. We need to lead with the technology. We have a lot to do in terms of building a positive reputation and building awareness of all the amazing science. And, Sheba was just mentioned as the 7th best hospital system in the world. We need to do a better job of shouting from the rooftops everything that's coming out of the country and lead with all the great science and technology and health systems that are there.
Thank you, Jodie. Jeremy, Elena, Michal?
I think it's an incredibly important statements were made by Ilan, Michal, and Jodie. We're in a world of complete uncertainty. In that world, what is required is complete unity. Because if you drive to that, then the uncertainties that surround you become easier to deal with. And the unity that was seen on the battlefield is one that needs to be translated completely into the spirit and actions of those who are uniting for a democratic Israel. And Ilan, you said the right thing. You can't rely on the grandparents to be the glue that holds us together. That glue needs to be refreshed every generation, but it needs to be refreshed with the values that speak to what Israel actually is. So for me, this last period since the beginning of 2022 has been a period of, you're right, initial shock, then depression, then absolute depression over October 7, and then inspiration as people came together and are now facing what they need to face with the right attitude. And that needs to grow considerably. And so I just want to thank everybody for listening in. We are going to talk about biotech, but underlying biotech are the values that the new Israel is demonstrating, and really hope that you'll support that.
And perhaps I'll add to this. I mean, obviously October 7th itself was a shock and a blow to Israel, but the immediate response of the IDF and the immediate response of the civilian society, I mean, those are so inspiring for all of us. And I think that's, if I'm thinking of the generation of young soldiers who fought since October 7, what they experienced, what they learned, their initiatives, their ideas, their experience. I am confident that there's a whole new generation of leaders that has been born for the state of Israel.
Yeah, I'll just add that in addition to sort of seeing how Israel is coming together within Israel, we could see the same response outside of Israel here across the US of many individuals, organizations, companies really trying to support Israel in any way they could. And I think we need to leverage that bond that was sort of reignited between the Israelis and the Jews around US in support of Israel. And we can leverage that for the growth of Israel in the future.
If there is one word which I think comes here together is involvement. We moved from being the quiet majority to being not so quiet, and we are the majority. The camp of the Declaration of Independence is a vast majority of Israel. It's not always what you hear on the news, because you always hear the extremes, and unfortunately, some of them are in the government, but we are involved. Yesterday, 500,000 people outside. Today, a similar number in Jerusalem. I still don't know the numbers. And the second part is a young generation which is being involved, understanding you need to set your own future in a new way.
Thank you, Ilan. Thank you, everyone. We'll move on, and the next question, why won't we start with Jeremy and Jodie, and everyone please feel free to jump in. Moving more toward biotech, what are the unique challenges of boosting the Israeli biotech competitive edge, and how can we resolve them?
Perhaps I'll jump in and put a couple thoughts in everybody's minds. The world is full of biotech. In actual fact, it is the strategic imperative of the Chinese government to be the dominant provider of biotech in the world in 2035. The United States has recognized biotech as one of its strategic pillars, and although it's going through some transitions right now, that will remain. So what is unique about Israel that really needs to be built? Because in this moment, unlike the high-tech world, where Israel has from the age of 12 all the way through the army, all the way through to the high-tech moment, the funding, there is not a continuity of a community which says we are biotech and this is what we're doing. What does Israel have that is enormously powerful? Well, we know academia, phenomenal. And they also have the right to investigate questions that nobody else is allowed to investigate in countries where they're much more directed in their research. You have, in addition to which, extraordinary, let me underline that word, extraordinary medicine, coupled with centralization of databases and people who stay in the same place for all their lives. That means long-term medical information about individuals with disorders. And then a burgeoning and extraordinary AI ability to query that data. So, what could one do? It's my firm opinion, and has been for some time, that Israel needs to harness the preclinical data that they have with the clinical data that we know is there, and drive to be the center for phase 1 and 1B and 2A proof of concept of medicines from anywhere in the world. With 10 million people, there are plenty enough individuals with the disorders that need to be examined, plenty enough physicians who understand it, plenty enough people who could say, we're ready to look at these new medicines and decide, do they work? This will be a magnet, not just for driving the Israeli biotech community, but for attracting biotech communities from around the world to use Israel as the hub, the central hub. I'm not talking about a hub, I'm talking about the central hub for these proof of first indications that it works. That is what I'd like to see happen, and I believe can happen with the right push from the government, with the right push and agreement amongst us as a community of biotech leaders in Israel. And with that, I know there's the support of the funds in Israel to do this, be it Pontifex, be it many of the others, MIG. They want this to happen because they know the intellectual property is there.
It's hard to add to anything that Jeremy has to say, but I'll just say that I often say biotech is not for the meek. It is the riskiest industry. 1 in 10 molecules will make it to market. It takes about 12 years, an average of $1 billion. Those that make it, that 1 in 10, that one pays off for the other 9 that didn't make it to market. What typically happens is that, physician scientists that come out of some of the best universities have incredible ideas. They're often first-time founders, and they need a whole village built around them. They're looking for funding, they're looking for partnerships, and everyone is typically chasing the same type of funding. And I think it's really important to get creative. I see a lot of biotechs go to the same venture partners. I think there are various opportunities, and it's best to go broad, looking at patient groups, looking at societies, looking at individuals for funding. But first and foremost, you can't be successful without getting the funding that you need to. I'll say I've been in this industry now for 30 years, working in a lot of big companies, some small companies. And to Jeremy's point, no company I work for has ever thought of Israel as a site on their own without it being brought up by someone, on the inside. So I think the Israeli healthcare system and the tremendous hospitals there have a lot of work to do to make sure, they're becoming sites and trials. And then, on the flip side, just getting very creative about funding and partnerships too, because you won't be able to get that incredible idea, that incredible science all the way through the trajectory without it.
Thank you, Jodie.
I'd also like to add that in addition to being a clinical sort of central, we can also be an industry, a sort of an industrial center. So a company I advise is working on creating ADC technology, and they know that the only companies that can provide them are either in China or in India. Why not Israel? Why not become and sort of facilitate the building of the infrastructure that can help not only Israeli biotech companies, but also biotech companies around the world, and provide and make sure that it's easy and accessible and reliable to build in Israel early stage companies and to develop those technologies. Jeremy, of course, mentioned academia research that is very strong. We have the technology from the army that is coming out, it's very strong. And if we want to have them partner together and being able to build in Israel early stage biotech companies, we need the infrastructure as well. And I think it's completely doable.
So maybe I'll add a different angle, which is, so I'm actually a even stronger representative of the tech than the biotech, but I've recently shifted into biotech, and one of my observations is, and that's the angle that we're taking into this industry, is that Israel is definitely really strong in tech. I mean, we have the best tech entrepreneurs in the world, I believe, and so we decided that one of the areas that Israel and in general we could be really successful in is actually a new area of drug development. I mean, we actually called it hybrid drugs, and it's integrating the non-pharmaceutical components with pharmaceutical components in order to actually create this new type of holistic treatment. So the innovation actually is in tech, and I hope that if this becomes a way of actually delivering drugs where you integrate drugs together with apps in order to improve the treatment, this could actually become an area of excellence for Israel, because in the end, it's leveraging all of the layers of AI, it's leveraging all of the layers of technology. And if Israel is really so brilliant with tech, there's a real opportunity to catapult drugs forward through actually digital interventions and the combination of those digital interventions with drugs. Again, there are many other tech bio companies, by the way, that are doing things earlier on in the drug development. So whether it's in drug discovery and supporting the earlier clinical development, differently than what Jeremy said. Actually, when you're taking these types of innovation and combining non-therapeutic interventions with pharmaceutical components, you immediately go into the later phases of development. So, in fact, we're actually already launching a phase 3 trial in Parkinson's disease. So it's an area where companies in Israel could innovate and reach the later phases actually faster on than with regular drug development.
May I respond just for 1 minute? I think Michal puts a very important point. It also offers an opportunity in Israel, which is different from, it's a unique opportunity. It's opportunity because of the changes in the United States. Right now, the FDA in the United States is being roiled. And I mean roiled. It's been disassembled in many different parts of it. And that is in large measure because of changes in policy. One of the areas that is being changed fundamentally is this tremendously important area that Michal talks about, the link between high tech, AI, and these devices and apps that can actually help you benefit your medicines. Israel could, if they chose to, become a true, genuine leader in this area if its regulatory framework was adjusted such that these types of technologies could not just enter phase 3, but could be approved in Israel and therefore lead the world by saying, we have something brand new. While the uncertainty prevails in America, I think this is really an opportunity for Israel to jump on.
I mean, I can only agree with you. I think one additional important point that is important for clinical trials is diversity. My elder kids are half Yemenite. I'm not exactly Yemenite. The amount of genetic diversity, because Jews were all over the world and came to here from all over the world, is immense. We at Amai just finished the world's first clinical trial on a sweet protein and swilling, our sweetener, which allows for up to 70% sugar reduction without compromising health, taste, cost, and sustainability. And the experience of doing a clinical trial at the Ichilov Soraski Hospital in Tel Aviv was amazing. It was much, much cheaper than doing it in other countries. We had it in a much quicker way. And it was also involving many, by the way, a lot of Haredi people who are volunteers. And we got results which nobody in the world has in order to showcase our sweetener. I can also agree with the points of Jodie and Elena, who spoke about infrastructure and about going out of the box when you are now scaling up, because the first milestone of Amai was actually that I signed an umbrella agreement with the Weizmann Institute to use them as a service unit. Now, I've been many years at Weizmann, so it went up to the board, so there won't be IP contamination. But that enabled us to do so much things using service units, which are available in academia, but in other areas, including scaling up, we definitely need more infrastructure for scale up. And this also goes for funding, where we need to go to additional places. I came back on Friday from San Francisco and 10 days going back to San Francisco. But in the last year, I've been 6 times in Brazil, in Abu Dhabi, in other places which are not the most San Francisco, Silicon Valley, Silicon Valley connection, but in other places, as we need to help bring funding and collaborations from around the world.
Thanks, Ilan. I'm going to move to the next question and talk about external stakeholders and ask mainly you, Ilan and Michal, do you feel that investor sentiments toward Israel changed since October 7th? What steps can company take in order to rebuild confidence, if at all?
According to Rise Israel of Eugene Kandel, the most authoritative in the field, in 2021, 2022, if you take out the billion-dollar investments, which are exits from old times, then the annual investment in high tech and biotech was $4 billion. This has dropped to $1 billion. So whether it is October 7, whether it is increasing interest rates, whether it is a change of some sentiment, it's hard to say what is what, but definitely in some areas from COVID, where it was more difficult to do investments from far away through October 7, it's becoming more difficult. But we are entrepreneurs. For us, you can have excuses or you can have challenges. At the end of the day, less companies succeed and you need to work harder, but that's what we do.
Thanks. Michal, do you have an input?
Not much to add. I mean, I've seen the statistics. I will say that I'm definitely seeing many companies raise funding. I mean, we just recently closed a round, and it's so there are many companies that are actually successfully raising funding. There've been many I guess maybe changes to focus of entrepreneurs not being able to focus over the past couple of years, given what has been going on from the judicial coup point of view in 23, and then later on October 7. So, I mean, all of this has impacted the focus of the high-tech industry. I will say that whenever I've been engaging, and the high-tech industry and biotech, we've for years been ambassadors of Israel. So we're constantly, acting as ambassadors outside of Israel. I haven't not felt, a negative sentiment, whether on the business side or, from the investor community. Clearly, we're aware of a lot of anti-Semitism that is, going on in many places, across the world. On a personal level, I've not experienced it, but I think in the end, what we need to do as a community is do what we do well. I mean, we need to be excellent. We need to innovate. We need to build good companies. And, in the end, business speaks. Good companies will get funded. Good entrepreneurs will get funding. And, partners will partner with good solutions. So I think in the end, what it's going to do, it's going to really challenge the industry in order to be even better than what it has been. And innovate to a greater extent. So, I think with all of the strength and power that we're seeing now pouring into the market with this new generation rising, I'm confident that, it's a bit like after, the 67 war, if you think of, the United States, also after different stressful periods, there was a boost in innovation that drove the economy and drove dramatic growth, and I'm expecting this to happen across all tech, biotech, and health tech industries in Israel.
Michal, you mentioned the judicial coup. I must add that in February, more than 2 years ago now, I spoke in the Committee for Law, Legislation, and Constitution, and I beg them not to do some of the steps because this will cause Amai Proteins Israel to become Amai Proteins Delaware. And you definitely see today some investors who say, we will give you the money, but only if you become a Delaware company. Now, I'm not saying that it's the end of the world, and there is a question, what is the definition of the Israeli tech, whether biotech or high tech? But more and more companies are, in order to get funding, have to be registered outside, and then you have a snowfall of moving first the marketing, then the bureaucracy, then the leadership, and at the end of the day, you don't have here the scale-up nation, you have the startup nation, and it's leaking to the outside. It's hard to maintain a company here when the company is not registered here.
May I comment on that? I think Ilan's made a very important point. Remember what we talked about right at the beginning. We talked about everybody coming together. We talked about how there's a whole new generation here. And I think once that generation expresses itself in its desires and capabilities politically, you will see a difference in the government policies. The government policies are extraordinarily hard in terms of encouraging investment in biotech. You have superb funds. I'll mention it again. You've got Pontifex, you've got MIG. These are people who want to invest here, but in fact, the opportunities are far easier abroad, where you have much easier terms of liquidity, opportunity to recruit people. They don't necessarily want specifically to do that, but they have an obligation to their limiteds. They must make money. That's their job. So I do feel that the changes that are going to come in Israel, and they will come, will encourage this to come back, because the capability, the foundational capabilities that we've heard about, not only on the high tech, but also in biotech, speak explicitly to bringing back capital into Israel. They must do. And by the way, it's not just about medicines. It's also about the profound impact of agricultural technologies, which the Gulf states desperately need. They need salt-resistant, drought-resistant plants. They need agri-tech. And whether that's not necessarily fund investment, that represents opportunities for corporate investment in Israel. And I think the kinds of bonds that Ilan's doing by working around the world are exactly the kinds of things that we'll see grow over time as the expression of the new generation of leaders in Israel makes itself felt. But the judicial review that has been clearly an underlying problem for investors abroad continues, and it will not stop until you actually see that change. You must see a change in that. Otherwise, why would people want to do it? But I think the confidence is going to come back.
I'd like to add that also the ongoing war and sort of when investors make an investment, they have to weigh in all the risks and the continued judicial problems in Israel and also the continued war is a risk that some investors don't feel like they need to be adding. We've talked about how investments in biotech are hard and difficult and risky, and that is additional risk that some investors are not willing to take, and that's something I definitely hear from the investors around the Bay. And I think that we need that stabilization in Israel in order to start seeing that rise in Israel, and I think that we need to facilitate that. I see, on one hand, you see those big funds opening, branches in Israel, and it's definitely that there is a continued interest in what's going on in Israel, but we will need to see some normalization, I think, before the investors feel confident to continue to invest, especially those that don't have a very specific bond, a unique bond with Israel. Of course, if you have an Israeli investor on the committee or someone that sort of really believes in Israel and can see beyond the challenges, as we usually do, we know that there are challenges, but we know also that we are capable to overcome them, as Michal mentioned in the beginning. But if we don't have that presence in those funds, then they just see the risk of it, and they prefer to wait a little bit until things settle down.
Thanks, Elena. You spoke about normalization, and I think this can really relate to the next question. Maybe we started talking a bit about it, but maybe we can deep dive a bit longer. How can the industry and the government work together, especially the government, together to ensure that Israel remains an attractive hub for biotech professionals? We started talking about it, but let's explore a bit more. Ilan, maybe you want to touch base?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, the Yozma, government, industry, change of policy really brought the startup nation. And this is where the government did some de-risking of some matching funds. And today there is a need for a second Yozma, and one is infrastructure, as Lena mentioned, one is clinical trials, as Jeremy mentioned, and another is the lobbying in the Knesset in order to change the policy, because at the end of the day, with the structure that we have here, you need to bring something which is well chewed and well processed and well win-win-win for everyone in order to do long-term change. And the last point, beyond the infrastructure, the multidisciplinarity and the lobbying, is to do it in a way where you're sure that everyone will win and that it will not cost in the short term too much. It can cost something if there is a short-term win. And this is something which is definitely doable. In the case of biotech, moving from the startup nation to the scale-up nation is a must, because otherwise you lose a lot of the long-term revenue. In the term of multidisciplinarity, as Jeremy already mentioned, we have the out-of-box way of doing things that nobody did. I mean, even at Amai, we have a department for AI CPD, computational protein design, led by a professor that did her PhD in Stanford. And after I published the main book in the field, it just got a Nobel. We have the biotech and we have the food technology led by the former CTO of SodaStream. So this thing of putting together different disciplines, including what Michal is doing between coming from tech and moving into tech bio, is a way to move forward. I think that what we saw now with civil organizations which are new, which are young, which are doing new things and entering a vacuum that the government unfortunately did not enter into, but doing really a national level change, such as Brothers and Sisters for Israel, is something where we need also the collaboration between people from all over the world and not only from Israel in order to be project oriented towards such things.
Yeah, and by the way, one other interesting direction to think about. I mean, obviously, there's government funding, which is always important, and it still continues for early stage companies. And I think in areas that are not necessarily just biotech, but if you look at digital health, I mean, definitely turning different sites into beta sites for companies that could drive also a lot of innovation. I mean, helping even in beta testing, especially because of the health records in Israel that are so available, and the data that is available to actually run different digital health tools using those. So Israel can be a really amazing data beta site for a lot of innovation. One interesting idea that has been recently raised is because we have amazing hospitals in Israel, probably top of the world. Sheba was recently now voted as 7th or 8th in the world as a top innovative hospital. There is actually an opportunity, maybe with the new administration in the US, to partner between the regulatory organizations of Israel and the US to a greater extent. And if somebody could drive forward the vision of having drugs that are registered in Israel have a fast path to registration in the US, I think that would boost innovation in Israel. I mean, I can tell you that running trials in Israel is so efficient and effective, especially because of the medical records and the ability to work. So if somebody could promote that direction, I think Israel would become the global leader in biotech very quickly.
I couldn't agree
You're
more.
a big visionary. I'm not sure what's going on today with the FDA, but definitely having clinical trials which are approved by the FDA is already doable today. Our clinical trial is registered on clinicaltrials.gov in the US, so this is doable. And I must also say, following what you said, Israel Innovation Authority is in Startup Nation Central, but especially the funding from Israel Innovation Authority, which does need some matching funds. We could have not done what we did without 10 different grants, mostly from them, some from Singapore and the EU.
I would like to endorse what's just been said. Michal's comment is correct. It does require the administration in United States not just to allow us, like Ilan's done, to register trials in Israel, but to accept
Exactly.
the provenance of
Difference.
clinical trials that are done in Israel. An administrative change in Israel would do it like that. That administrative change can be done at Misrad HaBriut in a heartbeat. It basically requires the following. Number one, that there be recognition that there are physicians in Israel capable of assessing technologies and clinical results. Number two, that their government is prepared to allow the approval to occur in Israel. Number three, championing in America the files that have been created in Israel such that they can be transported to America and said, this requires a review, but no additional trial. In this circumstance, you immediately open the floodgates because, as I said before, with the phase 1B, 2A, you can be the magnet for companies wanting to test their drugs in Israel. On the later stage, if you get that agreement, you actually now allow immense power to be exerted in a marketplace that's enormously attractive, and that will drive investment in Israel. And remember what I said, this is an administrative set. I've not talked about grants. I've not talked about donations. I've not talked about investment. I've talked about one person sitting in a room, writing down a signature on a piece of paper that says, we're in with this. as
So
far as I'm
Jeremy, I will
concerned,
follow up with you after this to see how we get this to work, because it's been something that I've been, wanting to promote. If you know exactly how to do it, I'm gonna try and, take it as a personal initiative.
I know exactly the people
And when
are.
Michal takes a personal initiative, it's going to happen. Okay, wrapping up before the Q&A, let's take one more question and then leave some time for Q&A. So Jeremy, you started, and just to maybe broaden the conversation, how can the international allies, we spoke about investors, but let's talk also about the Jewish diaspora, contribute to the rebuilding and the long-term success of Israel's biotech sector? Maybe you have a couple insights about that, and with that, we'll move to the Q&A section.
Israel's is different from the diaspora. The first step to recognize is that there has to be immense education in the diaspora of what Israel actually is today. What Ilan talked about earlier on, what Michal talked about earlier on, the new Israel. Number one, there needs to be an educational process across the world that says this is an Israel that is different from before 2022. It has changed. If we don't do that, we miss an opportunity. Second point, globally, there are immense funds that are available to Israel through various organizations, one of which we're discussing is actually the sponsor, or at least the sponsor intellectually of why we're here. Those funds are being directed in ways that are at times very anomalous. They're going to extremists, they're going to places that are not contributing to the infrastructure and building of Israel, education, health. They are highly partisan. Part of the education of the diaspora has to be not just about the difference of Israel, but how to stop sending the money or allowing it to be controlled by those people who are partisan and are not doing the things that Michal, Ilan are talking about, which is building a nation, creating a nation, building on the structure and the advantages that we have. So I think there are two things, and I'll stop. One, educating. Remember, Jews around the world are not Israelis. Most don't speak Hebrew. Most don't read Hebrew. Most don't understand the modern Hebrew Israeli mindset. They simply don't. Education is one. The second, in that education, how to make sure that the monies go to building the fundaments of what a great nation can be. Those are the 2 points I'd like to make. But
Thanks, Jeremy. We're going to move to Q&A to try to get as many questions as possible. So let's keep the answers relatively brief. A question from Sarah. How is the cooperative climate between research industry and universities, for instance, public and private differences regarding shared internship and funding opportunities? So if anyone can please take the lead.
As I mentioned, the first milestone I regard as a serious milestone for us is signing an umbrella service agreement with the Weizmann Institute. And the relationships are on one hand amazing, on the other hand, IP contamination is always an issue, and the issue is that investors look in worst case scenario. So for me, it's easier to collaborate with service units than with professors. We did have a couple of collaborations with professors, but there was always an additional complexity. But overall, I think that the lack of formality for good and for bad, as we saw in October 7 in Israel, also helps to nurture collaborations which are not straightforward in other places. When I went to my postdoc at UPenn, I was surprised that there is much less of a collaborative atmosphere between labs, between equipments, between central facilities. And this is something which is definitely found here in a much, much bigger way.
Thanks, Ilan. I want to move to another question that we got from Ron. He's asking, given the importance of the education system as a pipe for talent in science, how do you see the current demographic shifts toward religious orthodoxy impact your long-term business goals, if any?
That is probably one of the most strategic topics for the future of Israel. And education in general is critical, and especially education around STEM areas is something that certain populations in Israel are lacking. Even English as a second language, that's another area. These are areas where I'd say in general the participation of the ultra-Orthodox society in Israel, and it's taking part in the civil society of Israel, whether it's education, whether it's in military service, and whether it's in the general market and participating in the economy. Those are three areas where if there will not be a fundamental change in the coming years, I will say, beyond what we're talking about, which I think we can solve very easily, that is probably one of the biggest risks, to the, strength of Israel in the future. And that is why, this is something where, if you think of areas of infrastructure, I mean, when you think of tech in general, so as tech entrepreneurs, we always think, well, as we grow, as we scale, what type of infrastructure do we need to build? So Israel has grown, but there are different infrastructure areas, whether it's constitutional, whether it's defense, and I'm, the ultra-Orthodox population not participating in carrying the burden of the defense is not good for the state of Israel. And whether it is, I'd say, more generally, the economy. So all of those are areas where we need infrastructure changes, institutional changes as well. And those are things that will carry us many, many years forward. What we need is courage. I think right now, many of the leaders that we have in Israel are lacking the courage to make these decisions on changes to infrastructure. It's like when you're running a company, when you need to make a long-term investment in infrastructure, it's like, well, it's a long-term investment. I might not, see the fruits of it, but it is a long-term investment. And if we want, Israel to be strong and resilient, and maybe here it's kind of shifting also to, the topic of AID as well. I think all of us that are, participating and supporting this coalition and understand the importance of the future of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, we need to understand that these are the areas of infrastructure that Israel needs to invest in, and obviously education and participation of all citizens of Israel in the economy and in the burden of carrying the country forward is super important.
Thanks, Michal. We're going to take one last question. I will ask one of you to answer it within 60 seconds. I know it's going to be a hot topic, but we've seen a lot of questions about this. As a physician investigator who performs clinical trials in the US and is hoping to move technology from current Israeli collaboration to the US, how do you suggest we get the FDA to recognize Israeli trials? Who will educate the FDA to do so? And this is from Rosaline.
I have a general comment. So perception becomes reality. Everyone on this call knows what Israel has to offer. And I face this challenge leading an organization in Connecticut. Now, there's no bad perception of Connecticut, but no one thinks of Connecticut as a life science hub for innovation. Investors ask, why Connecticut? So we had to do quite the campaign to really, one, bring people here, tour them, partner with Yale, show them everything Connecticut has to offer, but then also do a campaign, on TV, radio, media. We made it here. Does anyone even know that, in Connecticut, we made the COVID vaccine here? So I think Israel needs to do a good job. We all have to come together and make sure that we are promoting everything that's happening.
Rosalie, drop a line through the organizers and I'll help you think that through. It would be my pleasure. I would like to add one last thought to you. You cannot do what we want to do unless you ensure that a Jewish democratic nation is formed, because there are many places to invest. And so I'm extremely hopeful, and I hope everybody else is encouraged by the expressions by Michal, Ilan, Jodie, and Elena, and of course you, Batell. We must all focus on that unity that I talked about before, because if we don't, then in fact the real opportunity of biotech will not be expressed in Israel. The same will apply to other areas. And I am extremely encouraged by what I've seen most recently in my trip there at Aeon Labs and elsewhere. Incredibly exciting, incredibly encouraging, and we just need to take advantage of. Last comment before we stop talking, if I can. All of this is against the backdrop of only one thought in my head, and that is for the hostages.
Jeremy, thank you for mentioning that. Before we wrap up, and being sensitive of time, again, a kind reminder of the March 10th World Zionist Congress elections, and to conclude even with a direct connection to our webinar, promoting and reprioritizing funds toward core education, which is meaning investing in Israel's education system with a focus on core curriculum, ensuring equality, non-sectarian learning, with a clear goal to preserve Israel's status as the startup nation in the long run and accelerate growth. Now that we all understand more about how we can help Israel from the US, please get involved, as Ilan said. Get your family and friends involved. Register to vote for the Aid Coalition, whom delegates you have just seen and got their perspective on so many important topics. Israel needs your vote. And Jeremy, I will let you jump in here and take the last minute before we conclude.
I think I've spoken too much. I think the fact of the matter is, in front of you is an opportunity. Take it. Every single individual who's on this call and has listened to us should understand one thing. We are devoted to the creation of a democratic Jewish nation. To do that, we need to follow the precepts. Aid Coalition does that. Spread the word, talk to everybody, and understand that if we can have unity on the battlefield, we can have unity as a nation. And that is going to be dependent upon your helping us direct the funds to the right places in the right time and to the right people. And you've seen some of them here, and there are many more in Israel. Let's help them. Please join us.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for everyone for joining the panel. Jodie, Michal, Ilan, Elena, thank you for the